Welcome to our group. I hope you'll join. The purpose of this live stream is to get you the gal who's a single mom who has a couple of children looking up to her and expecting you to provide stability and food and clothing to call in. And we're going to put you to work and ask you, how much money do you make? And how much money do you need to provide for those children and for a recreational budget for yourself? And where do you live and how do you live? It doesn't work out and it's not going to work out. And the same with the guy. If you're working as a plumber or some such job, and you're dating a girl, and that young boy starts to look on you and bond on you as his father, and you decide to take up the role, well, how much money do you need to provide a mortgage, a house to live in? We used to live in a world called home economics, and that's what this live stream wants to go back to. The married couple was viewed as a base economic unit, and there are certain rules for that. And that's how you got everybody out of poverty and into plenty. That's how the United States had such a huge middle class. You don't live in that world anymore. You live in a peasant and property class society, and you're in dire straits. And so, if you're a guy and you're going to support a wife and child, well, how many hours do you have to work to come up with a mortgage for the house and a car and clothing and medical insurance and a recreational budget for you and your wife? And if you're a wife and you're running the household in a traditional fashion, traditional really isn't traditional. How much of money do you need? You have a household budget. What do you need for clothing and food and everything? And they go together. They form the married couple forms the base economic unit. They're viewed as one thing, and that's how you get home economics. In the United States, that's how you get a detached house from the 1950s. They were intentionally, or they were trying to intentionally design a detached house with that in mind. And that's as opposed to housing projects and apartments you rent out to other people. And apartments and housing projects are viewed as the same thing. And the people who run them are either called a class of intelligentsia or a bunch of slumlords. They're the same group. Let's come back over here. There's you, the American gal, whether you're listening to this in Los Angeles or Toronto or Great Britain. And they're hoping you'll chime in and say, look, this is how much money I make, and this is what I need to get everybody out of poverty and into plenty. And there's this gap here. And we're trying to get you to chime in so we can publicize that gap. If you do, then we can do something about it. Let me remind myself that in the 1950s, the communists said they would come out and overthrow the United States by about 1973. They were rather specific in it. And 1973 happens to be the year of the highest standard of living in the United States when it comes to the average Joe, the blue-collar guy. And our society fell apart then, just when they said it would. There was an upheaval in our society, and they started adopting home economics as one of the words for it. They started getting into all the golden real estate they could cash in on, and they made money by forcing other people to have to work more hours. In other words, they ran into a fork in the road, and they could either gotten onto a maintenance level, which is a God and country thing, or they could have cashed it all in and moved into the foothills and became the upper class in a peasant and property class society. They chose the latter. Home economics. Home economics is when the married couple is viewed as a base economic unit. So picture a 1950s American detached house with a living room to live in that's comfortable enough to get you out of poverty and into plenty, and a dining room to eat in, and a kitchen to service the dining room, and a bedroom, and a utility room, and a garage for the car. And the car is viewed as a kind of farm truck. It serviced the household. And there was a place for the guy. It was just the guy's place, whether it was a bench in the garage or some such thing. And the same for the gal, and then a living room for everyone to live in. In other words, a house was designed very intentionally, a backyard for for yourself and the children. It's intentionally designed. And they did a good job of it. I remember an architect telling me that he could design a house where the married couple would live happily ever after, or the married couple would be divorced in about 6 months. Excuse me. It just depends on how they design it. And so let's go back to our 1950s American house and go off to the side and start with farming and mining, and then above that, manufacturing, and then above that, wholesale, retail, and repair, and above that, retirement, education, and recreation. And then the doctors and lawyers are kind of doctors and lawyers from a lattice that causes everything to come into, that holds everything together. And it's the Catholic priest that causes everything to come into being to begin with. All this comes out of monks and monasteries and popes and everything. To be normal and well-adjusted is a Catholic shtick, is a religious shtick. And now picture our couple there, and you ask the gal how many oranges she wants to use, and you know how many orange trees to plant to get her out of poverty and into plenty. I picture a couple choosing between a couch and 2 recliner chairs in their living room, and you could just daydream, and you could picture all the farms and mines, and then all the manufacturing choosing to build a couch instead of recliner chairs or some such thing. And the wholesale and all the stores and all the advertising, it's all geared toward getting that young couple what they want. And there's rules for it. The same people that do the producing have to do the consuming. That young man has to work in the furniture factory, and that young gal have a very fundamental profession of a mother and a father. And in other words, they have to practice virtues. And you can really get into this. There was a hotshot Briton named Adam Smith, who's figured out that if you specialize in labor, you can produce more than you consume. And the Catholic Church came right in behind that and said, you have to practice virtues, and then that sort of thing kicks in. And that's true. And that's how you get recreation time. Recreation time comes in there. And it was working very well. We actually sat around and had discussions in the United States decades ago about what to do with all this recreation time. And they threw it all out. In philosophy, they threw out Christ. They separated the act of sex from the act of getting the gal pregnant. And they threw out decency as decency as an argument. And they started making money by forcing people to have to work more hours. They felt good hurting other people. And they were malicious. It was a celebration of malice. And there was a soldered connection between money and malice. Just so it said that adjustment isn't true anymore. I mean, that adjustment's been made. And so now you could be in the peasant class and be a scoundrel or quite a decent person. You could be in the upper class and be a scoundrel and quite a decent person. And we just have to have a shift of a changing of categories. We'll put the decent characters over in our gang. We'll put the priest over in our gang and the pimp on the other side. We'll call the pimps the bad guys, and we'll stick up for the good guys. The good guy is the gal who would feel good about getting the child to school and clothes on her feet and that sort of thing. Remember, the women's liberation movement crawled out from under the cruel yoke of children. And from the point of view of the guy in the 1950s, and that goes into the 60s and 70s, the young man was considered a good citizen, a good husband and father, and a good citizen. Then he became, for a while there, a male chauvinist pig, a white male chauvinist pig. And now he's neither. He's just a peasant. And so if you're a young man, you ask yourself how many hours I have to work. So I know darn well it's more than 40. I happen to know darn well it's more than 80. It's probably double that if you're the plumber or repairman and that sort of thing. And so you ask, how much is a mortgage on a house if you're in Los Angeles or St. Louis or Toronto or Great Britain or London? How much is a mortgage on a house? How much does it cost for healthcare and shoes and school? How much does it cost for a recreational budget for yourself? It really isn't the children. It's that gal, Susie from St. Louis, and Bill from Britain, and they're a married couple, and also all the society is geared around getting you what you want. You become a professional husband, you become a professional housewife. And so the country, the society centers around getting you what you want. You get the next generation of children raised, and life goes on. You come into being because there's a Catholic priest and a Catholic nun, and you can just see the Catholic nun being a mother to society. And if you can put words into that emotion, you can see that that emotion was completely thrown out of our society, of the United States. We have no sense of love and no sense of guilt, no sense of empathy. They couldn't care less. Over here, these people feel guilty about not being an absolutely perfect person, or there were Jim Crow laws 100 years ago and that sort of thing. And they're almost considered a hypocrite for not being an absolutely perfect person. On the other side of the coin, they're a perfect person. They have no sense of love. They have no sense of guilt. They couldn't care less. And they use that sort of thing. Let's just go back over here. I know a gal who was complaining like mad. Her take-home pay was about $1,600 a month, and about $2,000 a month. Her rent was about $1,600 a month, and she just shrugged her shoulders. What am I going to do? And the answer is nothing. You lose. You fall into a poverty. That's done very intentionally. And if you're that gal, just look at the women's liberation movement and look at the gals who are head of the departments of government and head of the university departments. They're the ones that caused all that. Those people, those gals and guys, who the women's liberation movement, the ones who are in charge of our governments and our universities, our society, they're the ones who decades ago had a choice to do nothing more than get onto a maintenance level, and they refused to do it. They were very brassy and snotty and threw bombs in the street. We would have tore it all down, said Jana Shalala, the first black girl Surgeon General of the United States. If we hadn't got everything we wanted, we would have torn it all down. I'm for the violent overthrow of the United States government and replacing it with communism, says Angela Davis, who is a university professor. And when they had the riots a few years back, there she is. She must be in her 70s, putting her fist in the air and saying the same thing, tear it all down. She was also getting about $30,000 a speech, if I understood right, for saying the same thing she did years ago. She's literally one of the people that caused all this poverty. And Jane Fonda is another one. She's sitting in North Vietnam during the Vietnam War on an artillery piece, bragging how they had stopped the bombing in places like Cambodia, and now they can go to work defeating the American military. She wasn't arrested and shot for treason, and, well, she just won, and that's all you could say about it. What did they win? They pushed us into the consumption society. They tore it all down with economics. Everything's about economics with them. And if they die off, well, they won. They had all the sex and drugs and consumption they could possibly get, and you're paying a terrible price for it. Let's go back to you. You're listening to this and you're in London and you have a child and you're working someplace as a sales lady someplace or behind the counter at a store. How much money are you making? How much are the bills? How much is rent? In this group, you don't pay rent. You don't rent property to people. You don't rent property from people. And if you're a guy, how many hours do you have to work? There used to, this house you see behind me is our parents' house. And it was built in right around 1950, a post-World War II house. And our dad was a repairman. And with that income, he could support a wife and his children. This is falling apart, but it's a 3-bedroom brick house and a half-acre lot. And a repairman could afford to do that. You couldn't do that in any other place in the world. And 99.9% of the times in the history of human beings on this earth. And that included the Soviet Union, a communist country, the prima donna intellectuals government. Let's go back over here. Now that adjustment's been made, and you, if you were the repairman, you had to start working more and more hours, starting in the 1970s here in the United States. And then you and your wife had to start working, and then now they've institutionalized teenagers back in the workplace. It all has to do with the feminist movement. It all has to do with Harry the Hippie and Al the Afro and Donna the Feminist. Those people you see on TV bragging about all this. Now let's go back to you. Remember, the purpose of all this, if you're listening to this, is to go grab that gal and sit down and say, okay, this is how much money you make, and this is how much money I need. And if you're a guy, how much is a mortgage? How much is a car? How much is health insurance? How much are all the things you need, including a recreational budget? They never talk about, they used to have discussions about recreational budgets in my school days. They don't do that anymore. Once you do that, you ask yourself, if you're the guy, how many hours do I have to work? You realize that these guys did something terribly nasty. They threw out God. They separated the act of sex from the act of getting the gal pregnant, and they made money by forcing you to work more hours. They caused poverty. In the Bible, that's one of the unforgivable sins, but they justified their actions by saying that we don't follow religion, and so that's what we're going to do. They didn't have to. They could have justified their actions lots of other ways, but they didn't do that. I misspoke, actually. It's a philosophical thing. If Christ didn't come back from the dead, then that's what you do. You move into foothills. You become a psychopathic nut, for want of a better way to say it. You become the professional consumer, and everybody in the foothills in the valley does all the consuming for you. If Christ did rise on the third day, there's an emotional change in you, including the chemistry and the atoms and the electrons and the atoms in your head. And you maximize benefits and maximize utilities in a completely different direction. You're normal and well-adjusted, and that's not a natural thing. You're for a normal supply and demand curve, and normal is not a natural thing at all. And home economics. Once we know where we are, once you decide, and we asked you what you need, you can do something about it. You can start to get things for you. You can rearrange things back to home economics. Home economics, by the way, is if you get a feel for it, and it doesn't take much at all to get the general idea, you can have a discussion about all sorts of things. Socialized medicine in Great Britain is one of the things. So, take it as a compliment. You pick on the good guys, so to speak. You don't pick on the other socialized medicines in the other European countries, and you don't pick on the American Indian tribes here in Arizona. You pick on the Brits for a good reason. And they have socialized medicine, and they also have privatized medicine. And so you have to stop. Socialized medicine is when they take taxes out and use the taxes to pay for your health care. And privatized medicine is when they go out and they hire a doctor. They have both. And so you have to wonder, wait a minute, if you take taxpayers' money to provide health care for everybody, you shouldn't have to have privatized medicine. And how can you afford to go to a doctor by yourself? And you realize something's horribly wrong there. And let's go back over here. We're going to go back to home economics. And first, we're normal, well-adjusted people, and that's where you become a Catholic in the pews, an American Yank, a normal, well-adjusted person. And then there's home economics. And so picture a detached house and picture the young couple in that house. And the idea is to have 100% of what medical science has to offer inside that family unit. And so there's a set of priorities. That doctor has a set of priorities above, say, professional athletics. And you realize that there really shouldn't be professional athletics. It's amateur athletics and professional doctors. And so that doctor becomes a Catholic doctor in the pews, the family physician, as opposed to medicine men and communist doctors and that sort of thing. Let's go back. You're a family, you're sitting there in the household, it's home economics, and there's the family doctor. He's the one that's going to provide 100% of what medical science has to offer towards you. And so what do you do? You and I, we make sure that that doctor lives in a doctor's house, in a doctor's neighborhood. We make sure that he has a Cadillac in the driveway. We make sure he takes Wednesdays off to go play in that silly tennis tournament they have every year, or golf, or whatever he wants to do. And if he needs a secretary, we start a secretary school. He needs a nurse, to start a nursing school. He needs a heart specialist, we start a heart specialist school. In other words, we have the desire to make him as better off as we possibly can, because he's a doctor, and our kind of doctor tries to take care of us. Even though he may not like us at all, he still tries to take care of us. The idea of willing the good of another person is what you're at. And now from there, who cares whether you go through the government sector or the private sector, or maybe even a company like Blue Cross and Blue Shield, or maybe even a health insurance company that issues stocks. If there's a company and they issue stocks, they would be called a quasi-public company or a quasi-private company. And so the idea is that socialized medicine is completely different from going through the government over here. Let's say if you have $20,000 a year as an income, or I think it was $12,500 in early 70s, something like that. Let's say you had $20,000 and $3,000 went to healthcare for you and your wife and your children. And if you had taken it out as taxes, but let's say you only had to spend, or you had to spend $3,500 if you didn't have to pay taxes, but you went out in the public sector and bought health insurance. Well, then if it just makes sense to go through the public sector. And so that's what you do. And that going through the public sector, that kind of socialized medicine is completely different from the communist socialized medicine, or Great Britain and that sort of thing. Over here, it's called home economics, and philosophically, you can see what they do. To quote that Bishop Fulton Sheen, they take incidentals and raise it up to absolutes. Incidentals, health insurance is just a means to an end. You can have any kind of health insurance you want. The absolute is getting to heaven after you die, and because of that, you just try and make that family doctor as better off as you possibly can. That turns into willing the good of another person, turns into a normal supply and demand curve. And that works. That's how you get a huge middle class. It was working so well. That's what they threw out, and that's what we have to get back to. And so if you're a gal and you're in dire straits, and you have 10-year-olds who can't pay for their mommies, or teenagers who are beside themselves because they have to grow up so fast and they don't know what to do, they're trying to see their mom work and they're beside themselves, it's just not going to work out. And if you're a guy, the same thing, it's not going to work out. So we've had a handful of these live chats. And if you happen to hear it, speak up. Get some gal who's in those shoes to start putting into the live chat what in the world's going on. This is how much money I make. And this, by the way, is a house that is appropriate to raise children in. They don't design houses this way anymore, but there are houses out there. And by the way, this is how much money I'd have to spend on the mortgage. And this is how much money I need for groceries and that sort of thing. And you're a young man, find out how much of a house you would need, find out how much of a car you would need, and find out how many hours you have to work. And once you guys start typing into the chat, then we can do something about it. So please publicize these anecdotes or these live chats. And you can go on Instagram and Facebook. It's the groups are Time to Act, or on the YouTube channel, The Priest and the Pimp. And if you start speaking up, then we can do something about it. Hope to see you.